I'm standing in a country park on top of a small knoll in northwest Leicestershire. I'm in a village known locally as Bagworth, or Bagworth to those from outside of the area. Were I to bend down and scrabble a little in the thin soil, I'd discover small pieces of coal slag. This knoll was in fact the heap, or slag heap of the Bagworth colliery, which in the early 1980s employed in excess of 1,000 people. Some 27 years ago, where now these neat, sedate, modern houses stand, the views and sounds would have been of a heaving, belching cacophony of industry in a corner of what was the long-established Leicestershire coalfield. The last national miners' strike was called in 1984 and lay at the heart of a political agenda which characterised the Thatcher government's attitude towards the trade unions. Vast reserves of coal had been amassed at power stations, the government believing that the time had come to provoke a strike intended to destroy the power of the unions once and for all. Only 30 Leicestershire miners answered the national call to strike, 19 from the Bagworth colliery. To refuse to cross any picket line was a sacred principle emblazoned upon the hearts and minds of these men. They were to become known as the Dirty 30. This is their story.
Let me tell a story, for I really can't ignore the happenings in Leicestershire in 1984. 2,500 walked across that picket line, but a tiny band of miners would not go into the mine.
Behind us is Morrison's. This is the Dearne Valley. Corton Wood colliery was situated along with a dozen other pits in the Dearne Valley. At its peak, along this valley, 60 to 70,000 miners worked in the pits. On the 1st of March 1984, the National Coal Board made a shock announcement that Corton Wood colliery was to close. On Monday, the 5th of March, they picketed the Barnsley NUMN quarters and said, "We have to fight this closure." And that action was the spark of the year-long epic miners' strike of 1984-5.
Everybody that worked at the pit knew that it was coming. They knew that they'd be called upon to go out on strike.
I just couldn't cross the picket line. My dad was a trade unionist, I used to be a shop steward at the brickyard, and I enjoyed it. Even though some of the lads wouldn't join the union at the brickyard, they still got the same benefits as we fought for, but there you go. But I couldn't cross the picket line, so I said to this guy called Terry French from down in Kent, "How long are you going to be here for?" He says, "As long as it takes." So I said, "Well, all I can promise you is that these people will not come out on strike. Not a chance, because they just won't do it."
But to people like myself, it wasn't about that. It was like more a political thing where they were doing things for political reasons and not for industrial reasons. I knew that they wanted to close pits that weren't exhausted like they were saying. They weren't telling the truth. But referring back to before the strike, you didn't really know what was going to happen, but I knew in my own mind, I knew what was going to happen to me.
So Benny was the natural leader of the group.
The strike started in early March. We'd already been out to the picket lines because there were picket lines from the Kent miners right from almost within a few days of the strike having started in Corton Wood and then it being declared as national. So we'd been out. We found Kent miners out in Bagworth pit, and they'd been sleeping in their cars and sleeping in ditches. So we said, well, look, we can accommodate you. We had lots of contacts in Leicester, so we got the Kent miners accommodated.
Because the Bagworth miners had told them that they were going to support the strike, the Kent miners had gone elsewhere, thinking that they'd already got the Leicestershire miners out.
After a meeting of the NUM executive on the 8th of March 1984, local areas were given carte blanche to take strike decisions. This meant that each area had its own local vote as to whether to strike or not.
Trevor Hines was the union bloke at the pit, but Jack Jones is the area leader. I think Hines had gone to see Jones, and then betwixt themselves they decided that they weren't going to let this happen. Like, they weren't going to let it take its course and the blokes be picketed out or just join the strike, really.
We met up on the picket line. Benny used to work at the same pit as me, but we hardly ever used to bump into each other because different jobs. And there was some other lads like Sammy and Bobby Gervin. We all got together and so what do we do now, you know, sort of thing, you know, because there was no funding because our union was not on strike, so they said. So one day we said, well, we've got to do something about this because we're getting nowhere, you know, we've got no money. Food was running low. So somebody said, well, we need to have a meeting. I don't know, it might have been Nigel Jeffrey actually. But, excuse me, we went up to this pub in Bagworth called The Barrel, which has since gone. And we got together sort of thing and got organised. And we said, well, if we're going to be a group, what we're going to call ourselves. And I can remember one of these scabbos, one morning, I know who it was, but I'm not going to tell you his name because I don't want him to glorify himself in it. It was asked by Radio Leicester, what do you think of these miners that are on strike from your pit? He says, well, I just think they're a filthy, dirty 30. And I looked at him and I thought, you don't know what you've done, mate. What a great name. So he gave us a name. And Benny says, you can't call yourselves that, is crap. Benny wasn't one for this, you know. So he said, what about striking miners of Leicestershire? I said, no, that's crap. So we were having this, not an argument, but some disagreement. Excuse me. So in the end, I think most of the lads liked the name The Dirty 30, and that was how it stuck.
We all knew in Leicestershire that the mines were finishing and they were paying out redundancies, and a lot of the talk were among the chaps, if you strike, your redundancies will be gone. But they were very annoyed in the fact that Arthur Scargill went into a strike without the least consultation with any of our union representatives in Leicestershire.
Well, they voted with their feet. The vast majority of the mine workers voted with their feet, and they could have had 20 or 30 ballots around here, and they'd have still gone back to work. If they said you're going on strike, they'd have gone on strike for a couple of days, and then they'd gone back to work because they're just traditional woolly-backs. That's a fact. It's just history will tell you that. You know, loads of my mates went to work, and I just couldn't believe it.
Well, myself, I felt guilty that I didn't strike and join them. But as my mates here said, the pit ain't got much life left in it, and I'm coming up to the age where the redundancy will coming in.
They were called the Dirty 30, so they wore that name with pride. Was the only striking miners, they stood against the tide. And if you call them heroes, they would surely disagree. But the Dirty 30 and the kin are all heroes to me.
And when we got to 1984, we had the big strike, and my father just could not believe that miners would cross miners' picket lines. So he says he wanted to come to the picket with me one day, so I said, yeah, okay, Dad, you come and sit there. And he's a very fiery man, my father, and when he saw miners crossing picket lines, he actually went on the car park and picked a metal bar up and threatened a man who was scabbing, because that's how my father was, and the police escorted my dad off the car park. So from then on I had to ban him from the picket lines myself, because he would have hit that man with that bar.
One of the themes of the miners' strike that the media picked up on all the time was the violence. And I think it's very important to recognise the nature of the violence that was used, because policing during the miners' strike was quite savage. I'm not talking about the local bobbies meeting local pickets on the picket line at the pit. I'm talking about the way the Metropolitan Police, the Special Patrol Group, these were mobilised against the miners, and the level of violence was in marked contrast to the other national mining strikes that I experienced. In 1972, for example, I was at Saltley, and in general, while there were arrests of miners and there were melee and pickets and shouting, all sorts of activity going on at Saltley, one of the features of it was overall it was relatively peaceful. And in contrast, the strike of 84-85, the level of violence used against the miners by the police, I think, was underreported and indeed censored.
Became obvious to us, me and Rico, that our phones were tapped. The reason it became obvious is because you were hearing noises that you didn't hear before. It was like you'd have to be completely stupid to know that something wasn't amiss. So we, at one stage, we did decide to test them out. And Rico, we organised it where Rico would ring me and tell me that we were going to picket. The pickets were going to be at such and such a place, and so on and so forth at such and such a time. And he'd go down, he'd phone me up and tell me about it. Then he'd go down and see what happened. And he went down to the pit, and the police arrived in their hundreds and hundreds, and obviously so it just proved to us that they'd been listening.
My wife at that time, my wife Linda, she phoned the strike centre in Leicester one day, and the guy answered the phone, our phone. He said Syston Police Station, and it went from our phone, my phone, personal phone, it went straight through to Syston Police Station. And then there was a click, and unbelievable stuff.
My recollection of the Miners' Support Group is that it got off the ground extremely quickly. Virtually at the same time, we got a resolution written after we'd been out there, a few of us who'd been out there. Melvin and Dave, who were both lecturers at the Leicester Poly at the time, got a resolution through their union branch, and then that got put to the Trades Council, which was basically saying set up a miners' support group, and listed all the things that we needed to do, like get trade union solidarity, collect money, collect food, support the Kent miners, provide accommodation for any miners that were visiting. So it all happened, when I've looked back at our sort of archive, it all happened extremely quickly. So there was a Trades Council meeting at the end of that month in March, and that's when it was set up, and I was voted, or it was agreed that I should be the coordinator of the Miners' Support Committee, and we set up a small committee of about 5 of us.
Leicester Support Group was the main bulk of support. I mean, there were people from all sorts of political, what they call gender, I don't know what they call them, but there were some crackpots amongst them, definitely. One guy in particular, I won't tell you his name either, he said, we demand a general strike and we want the Dirty 30 to walk down Charles Street in Leicester as the vanguard of the strike, and we'll join you behind you. And I said to him, I tell you what, you go into the vanguard and we'll follow you, but he never did it. But the support was incredible. We even had a support group in Colville, which is amazing, absolutely amazing that is. But we had a local councillor, Ross Wilmot, he's way up on the City Council in Leicester now. He supported us, but I don't know whether I should have said that or not, but he did support us anyway, so we had amazing support. Loughborough, Northampton even, you know, people went down to Northampton, shaking tins, collecting food parcels, and it was just amazing, phenomenal.
Oh, I'd heard about the Trades Council had a support group, which was the first miners' support group in the country, which is ironic really, because they put Kent miners up and they supported it was already up and running before we knew anything about it, or before they knew anything about us. I went down the Royal, a chap called Charlie Sorrell was the union rep there, and he fetched Sister Jane Bruton out, who was absolutely brilliant. I think she was she was I'll have to remember, she was something to do with the Trades Council, and she introduced us and took us to the Trade Council meetings and what have you, where they were already like best part organised, and they made it a million times easier for us because they were so brilliant in their support of us, really.
A girl I didn't know phoned me up, and she come over to see me, and she said that these women in other areas had got support groups. She says, why don't you get a wife support group? And I said, but we're on a good hiding for note here. I said, we live within at least a 30-mile radius of one another. I said, and it'd be just impossible. But anyway, we're going to try, and we had about a dozen turn up at the first meeting. And they come a couple of times, and then it dwindled away just down to the few that we've got here. But really, I mean, in my personal opinion, I wanted to do it because the men were so few to help them out.
We discussed how we could help our the men folk and what we could do. There were some of us that wanted to try picketing, and some women, wanted to help in other ways, like raising money or going with the boyfriends or husbands to, help raise money, or door knocking for leafleting for food, and because obviously the men folk weren't working, so there were no money coming in as such. There were other different organisations that supported the miners, and they'd help collect food as well and money. Did marching, as I've said before, picketing, and then as the strike escalated, we started to raise money for the women and children, and then we got Christmas approaching, so we approached different organisations, the Labour Party, like locally for donations, and that were absolutely fantastic. The children didn't think that they'd have a Christmas, and they ended up having a really good Christmas, but we weren't greedy, because what were left over we gave to other areas, toys, and so hopefully no child went without that Christmas. It was family were on strike.
It wasn't a Christmas like any other Christmas, no way, but Christmas came and went like it does, so it couldn't go fast enough for me. It wasn't a good time. We got a few things for the kids donated to us, which was good. We had my little girl Emma, she was little then, she ain't little now. We just got by on what we could, you know. People had gifts from different support groups and Christmas cards. But like I say, I wouldn't swap it for the world.
I first heard about the Dirty 30 back in '84 when the strike was beginning, and a group of us decided we were going to support them in whatever way we could. I remember once we were collecting food outside a supermarket in Ashby, buy an extra tin for the striking miners. People's reactions were varied, shall we say. Then when a police lady, strolled up, we thought she was coming to move us on, but she actually shoved a £5 in and said, "That's for the Dirty 30.
The leader of the railway men in Colville was Roy Butlin. I went to his union offices in London with him. I spoke at Hackney with him at big meetings. I can't speak highly enough of them. They were victimised by the railway people. They tried to sack some of them. They reckoned they were stealing things, all manner of things, anything to get them to move this coal.
Well, it all started with a meeting of the Triple Alliance. That's the steelworkers, the rail unions and the NUM. They got together at the end of March and decided that they would instruct their members not to handle any coal when the miners went on strike. And they issued directives to all the rail depots instructing us not to handle any coal or coke from April 3rd. And being good trade unionists and members of the NUR, we followed that directive. Well, it wasn't a question of difficulty persuading them. We put all the facts in front of them. We'd had a meeting with Jack Jones and the BRB, and we presented all the facts to them on April the 3rd, which is the day we received the directive, and the members of our union at Colville decided that they would not move any more coal. It was a difficult decision because by an accident of geography we happen to live and work in an area where the miners, most of them, have chosen to remain at work. But that is simply the fact we happen to be in Leicestershire. It doesn't affect the principles involved. I mean, the Triple Alliance stands for each union helping the other in times of trouble and strikes. And we were issued a directive and the members chose to follow it. And in my position as NUR chairman, I reflect the majority view, and always will. And the majority view was then, and still is, 23 weeks into the strike, that we're not moving any coal or coke.
And you have no hesitancy, in spite of the fact that there was only a very, very small minority of miners out on strike?
The fact that there's only a small minority of Leicestershire miners on strike is really irrelevant. It just happens to be where our depot is located. It doesn't alter the principle of the thing. The union issued a directive and the members decided to abide by it, and that's the end of it. And of course we move all trains from both South Derbyshire and Leicestershire, so the effect on the two coalfields was very important. We asked for a meeting with Jack Jones before our branch meeting on the evening of the 3rd because I thought it was fair to my members to canvass his opinion. And he saw us in his office, the three of us from the NUR branch, and I asked him one question. I said, what will be the effect on your members if we cease to move coal by rail? And he said, it won't make any difference. Up until the miners' holiday in July, we have enough stocking ground, so we shall simply stock it. And he says, I shall tell you this. He said, if after the July fortnight we need to use lorries, we'll cooperate in moving the coal by lorry if necessary. You know, we found his attitude, to be honest, quite appalling. As a trade union leader in the Leicestershire area, I was appalled at his attitude. And all it did, when I put that to the meeting that evening, it just hardened my members' attitude. I don't think Jack Jones is bothered whether his members' coal that they've turned out goes by road or rail. He'll cooperate with road haulage if necessary. He's got no interest or sympathy or anything for the railway workers in the Colville area. And we haven't got any sympathy with him. You know, I can't understand, this is personally speaking, I can't understand how he's remained in that job so long. Because I should have thought the NUM leadership would have wanted to get him out and quick. Because he's no good to the Colville area or the Leicestershire coalfield whatsoever. The fact that a lot of coal is going by lorry is a very great concern to me and to my members. That is the biggest problem I've got to face in convincing them in the rightness of what we're doing. You know, that is something I'm asked daily. What are we doing about the lorries?
The railwaymen, they were incredible. I mean, you know, why should they get involved really? But Roy Butlin, we call him Billy Butlin, he was the leader of the NUR at Colville Depot. And he says, well, I'm not going to signal any coal trains through at all. And he got disciplined through it. But he says, you can do what you like. He said, I'm not signalling any coal trains through. And there was a band of them. There was him, Dennis Wright, Graham Cross, Phil Davis, and little Ernie Allen. None of them would signal coal trains through. And they got in loads of trouble, but they were fantastic. They're my heroes, they are, not us.
The village I lived in, there was another miner that used to work at our pit who said something to my daughter at the local club one evening, and when she came home, he'd been threatening her and saying he was going to get me. It was the early hours of the morning when he came. Knocked on the door. I went to the door. He pushed his way in, threatening and what have you. Had a couple of swings at me. In the end, I had to deck him. I sat on him for 20 minutes. I could have beat 7 bells out on him, but I didn't. The police come in. I got off the top on him, let him have him. They let him go and he smacked me in the eye, and he thought he got his strength back again. I did tell him that it wouldn't be happening again, and I knew we'd be taking him to court. In the end, he got found, I think it was 70 odd quid, and they paid his fine for him at the pit.
We did have food that was sabotaged. Quaker oats, for example, there we found drawing pins and blue tack. Bottles had been spiked with something when you took the top off, they just exploded.
It's very difficult for some of my members when they go home, because they may have working miners each side. They drink in clubs, they drink in pubs alongside working miners, and some of the abuse and waiving of pay slips is, well, very upsetting to my members, but they've stuck by it.
We've got 2 girls, one 15 and 17, one in both at school, because one was in the 6th form doing her A-levels. The eldest one went picketing down South Wales, but she also stopped in with this couple, and she was the secretary, this woman was, of their strike bit. And when they segregated the funds, she had got a load of the South Wales miners' funds in her house, and my daughter, she slept on top of all this money. She come back and said, how much, I don't know how much money there were. It was a lot of money under the bed, sort of thing, that she was sleeping on top of. So she's, which were quite funny really, because we hadn't got any money.
You made your decisions. We carried the decisions through. At the end of it all, if you believe you've done the right thing, and I mean, she like fantastic support for me. Obviously, you have to speak when these crowds want to know what's going on, and you go to different union meetings, you go to different labour wards, people that are raising money for you, and the Trades Council support group. You need to get your case across to people that are interested, supporting you, or want to know more about what's going on, and you obviously get better at it as the more that you do.
I was listening to Benny. I thought, how does he do this? You know, because he was brilliant. And then we went down to Wales on one occasion, and we went to this pit called Penry Khyber, and there were absolutely militant miners, fantastic people. And Benny said his introduction, and he says, I'll hand you over to Rico now, and he won't say a few words. And I said, I don't. And he says, you do? I said, oh, Jesus. So I'm not kidding, my knees were knocking. I really mean that. My knees were knocking. And I said, I don't know what I said actually. I was terrified. All these miners looking at you. But it was a bit humbling because they all clapped. And they were like, yeah, I'm sorry, I get a bit emotional. They clapped, and brilliant.
Taking the miners' wives out to go and speak, and it was the most fantastic thing to see miners' wives who had not been involved in things before to be able to stand up and really find their confidence and find their spirit to speak about what it meant for them.
I spoke on platforms with politicians, Tony Benn, Dennis Skinner, the main union leaders in our union. Because I wasn't a delegate for the union, and I could say whatever I like, which I thought was the truth, which seemed to go down well with people.
Benny called me the Arts and Flowers man. He said, because he said, you give such a load of bullshit out to people. I said, it's not bullshit. I said, we've got to survive. I said, so I'm trying to give the Dirty 30 a high profile. I used to try and appeal to the public, thinking, well, you know, what are they doing and that. And I was trying to appeal to them and say, look, we're doing this for your kids as well as our kids. And Benny used to go, oh no, not that again, and stuff like that, because he was like the political man, if you like.
I'd introduce meetings, I'd do the follow-ups for meetings, I'd done meetings all over the country. I went and spoke at the end of the strike. I was asked to go and speak to big pits in Yorkshire to stop them going back to work when there were people drifting back to work. I was asked to go and speak in front of 2,000 miners that didn't know what were going on, because our example being a minute few out of many that were on strike.
We went down to London and that and met people. And we met some women miners that I was fascinated by. These women miners from America, they came over to London, and they were members of the UMWA, United Mine Workers of America. And we met some of them. Some were big women, some were tiny women. And we just couldn't believe that the women, I mean, I'd never heard of women miners. Like I say, we're just simple miners ourselves. And over the months, they went to rallies that we were at, and then one of them, her name's Kip Dawson, tiny woman. She worked on the face in the strip mine in West Virginia. She said, wouldn't it be wonderful if some of you could come over to see us? And yeah, we never thought any more of it. And then towards the end of the strike, Dave Douglas, one of the 30, he said, we've been invited to America. I said, well, how are we going to get there? He said, well, apparently it's been funded by the UMWA, the women miners and that. And so we went off to America and sold some badges and helped fund the costs of that. And we had a brilliant time. Some of the lads had to learn how to speak that they'd never done before. I hadn't done much of it. Near the end of the stay in America came about, they said, can you just do one final forum for us? And I said, yeah. And said, it'd be great if everybody could just say a few words. Towards the end of this presentation, the lad said, Rico, come on, you've got to finish this off, you know. We've had enough now. And they were whispering to me. I could hear them whispering. So I said, well, so if anybody's got any questions, just before we finish, I said, you know, feel free. And there were one or two different questions. And then this lady stood up and she says, Rico, she said, what's your opinion of the gays and lesbians? And I says, well, I said, everybody's equal to me. I said, you don't mind, not bother what they are, you know, gays, lesbians. I said, you're all fantastic people for supporting us. And I said, so I hope that's answered your question. She said, yeah, thanks. And she looked a bit confused. And then Nigel Jeffrey, after they finished clapping us and that, which was a bit embarrassing, he came up to me and he says, you messed that up, didn't you? Or words to that effect, if you like. And I said, what do you mean I messed it up? He says, that last question. I says, yeah, what about it? He says, she said gains and lessons.
So here's to Malcolm Pinniger, or Benny to his friends, who led the dirty 30 till the strike came to an end. And here's to all the other lads, so principled and true, and those who stood beside them like a worker's meant to do. They were called the Dirty 30, so they wore their name with pride. Was the only striking miners, they stood against the tide. Or maybe you'd call them heroes, they would surely disagree, but the Dirty 30 and the Kid are all heroes to me. They were called the Dirty 30, so they wore their name with pride.
Paul Mason helped to write a play called The Sun on Our Backs. And some of the actors actually did come here and study what I did day to day during the strike, and you know, my day-to-day life panned out, and it was quite overwhelming when we went to see the play, because halfway through, the girl who's played a girl called Kathy, they started calling her Kay.
One of the people who were involved in videoing it behind the camera was saying, you know, you could hear her crying. You could hear this sort of heavy breathing, sniffing behind the camera, because it was that level of detail that the play brought up in a dramatic way. And obviously the drama of that, you know, that's what drama is for, isn't it, in a way, was just fantastic to really give everybody a sense of what it really meant for the miners and their wives during this momentous year.
Well, when the strike was called to a halt, we knew it was coming.
The end of the strike was shattering for me, because Benny and I were down in London the day that the exec said that work is going back to normal, and we were just shattered. And I thought, well, what are we going to do now, you know? I think there was 20 of us from Bagworth, about 7 from Ellistown, 2 from Whittick, and 1 Johnny Gamble from South. What's going on to us, like, you know, because we did feel isolated. You know, there were no big brass bands for us to go back to work to, like you saw on the telly, you know, all the mines in Yorkshire. They had colliery bands playing them back into work. There was none of that for us.
So the return to work for us was going to be more difficult than if you lived in a community where everybody else was supporting you and your pit was mainly on strike and what have you.
The strike ended pretty well in March, as I can remember. So it was, you know, a year after the dispute began. And I just think, personally, it was just devastating. I think because just you knew what the significance of Thatcher being able to defeat the miners meant. You know, it was really significant. But and also, I just felt bereft. I think, you know, it was a whole year out of your life.
Jack Jones, he didn't say we couldn't go back. He said we hadn't paid us subs. So we weren't going to go back because we didn't know whether we'd be represented. We didn't know what was going to happen when we went underground. And because the Hines, the delegate at Bagworth, couldn't make any decisions on his own. He had to go to Jack Jones. Jack Jones said we hadn't paid us subs, so we weren't going to be represented. So we got in touch with the National Union, and the National Union sorted it out for us. And we went back to work when we were told by the National Union that we were represented. If the local area didn't represent us, they would.
They wouldn't let none of us work in like a face team or anything. We wanted to go back as a face team.
There were a difference after the strike with the Dirty 30 and them as work. There were a camaraderie soon back, whereas my parents told me that in the strikes of the past, anybody that didn't strike, like the 26 strike, which of course I don't know, the people in the village that worked, they were scabbed and they were broke off from all society altogether. They had nothing to do with it, and they even brought it down as far as the children. Well, there was nothing like that after this strike.
Oh no. They had like Benny, I think it was Benny and Darren and Dave Douglas, they worked together, and this split us up basically at the pit. And then out of the blue one day, one of the managers, he called me, Phil Smith and Sammy Gervin into his office. He says, I wanted to go over to Nelston Drift Mine and work there on nights. And we said, why? He said, well, because all the conveyor belt, everything needs to be cleared out. And it was freezing there, and it was wet, and it was a punishment, basically. But it wasn't a punishment to us, because we just laughed about it, I was 3. Them 2 lunatics, Phil and Sammy, were cracking jokes all night long. And it didn't matter how cold it was, we got by. Plus the fact we got 50% extra money for working nights. So it backfired on him. I left in '89, I did. I injured my ankle down the pit, and it was never right again after that. And I was struggling, because down the pit, you know, there's no smooth roads, no tarmac, it's all boulders and whatever, you know. And in the end, they offered redundancy, because he knew Bagworth was coming to the end of its life. Excuse me. So I took redundancy, I did, and I got out. And some of them stuck it through till the end, but I just had enough. And that's when the fun started, because I couldn't get a job anywhere. And apparently I was blacklisted. I was called a right-wing communist activist, which is, well, I don't even know what one of them is.
I took my redundancy, and then I set up on my own, painting and decorating and gardening, anything. And that was successful until I retired.
When we did eventually retire, I'd worked underneath here for 35 years. And I said, well, I might as well live on top.
Well, in the village there were precision rubbers, which I'd employed quite a lot. And then there were the big tubes, and then we got a JCB plant. So there were plenty of alternative work.
When the mine was closing, we had a choice really. We could move to Coventry, or there was a possibility of moving to Asfordby. There were some issues about which union you'd be in if you went to Asfordby, because there was the UDM. A lot of the miners in Leicestershire were part of the UDM, although at Bagworth we'd stayed in the NUM. So whether we'd have got a preference over there or got a chance to go over there. It was also changing to continental shifts, which I wasn't very keen on. The other option was Coventry, and I worked with Benny, and he moved over to Coventry, but I think we all knew it was only a matter of time before Coventry closed as well. So all we were doing really was just putting off the inevitable.
I didn't want to go to Asfordby, because I knew what was going to happen at Asfordby. I knew that Nottingham miners were going to take over it. I didn't want to go to Dormill, because that was a major scab pit, and I'd had enough of that. So what I did, I asked my friends and comrades that had ran the strike at Kersley had been sacked because of their role in the strike, if they minded if I went to work at their old pit, as it was then. And they said they'd be glad if I would transfer to Coventry. So I spent, until Coventry closed down, I went to Coventry to finish my pit life at Coventry Colliery.
I were able to go in 2009 to the Durham Gala, and it were absolutely amazing because the people were clapping. There were people there that actually remembered the Dirty 30, and it were just overwhelming. And I'm really glad I went. I wouldn't have missed it for the world.
In 2008, we went to Durham Miners' Gala with our banner, which we'd had made during the strike. When they seen it, a band was going by, because there's dozens of bands, dozens of banners, coalfields and union banners from all over the country. We were asked, this band leader said it would be a privilege if we'd walk with his band down to the grounds where they held the gala.
It's 26 years since I've been back here, from when the pit was standing over there. I think the pit head would have been around about there, and it's now an housing estate. Behind these trees there would have been the car park leading to the offices and where they kept the canaries, and the pit head baths. You'd go through a door, there'd be the canteen on the right and the pit head baths would be on the left. Yeah, I was 30 when the mine closed. I got a young family, got a young child. The mine, the industry was on its knees, so it was time to move on.
From time immemorial, men and women have stood firm against the corrosive tentacles of wealth, power and class. The story of the Dirty 30 is one steeped in the roots of working tradition, where the right to withhold labour when threatened is a long established principle. Fighting with an unerring resolve, this collective of men and women braved insult, adversity, political shenanigans and isolation in their own communities. They fought with bravery, fortitude, resolution, and sometimes with downright pig-headedness. They emerged not victorious, but with heads held high and heart-scorched principles intact.
Union miners, stand together, do not heed the owner's tale. Keep your hand upon your wages and your eye upon the scale. Union miners, stand together, do not heed the owner's tale. Raise our valley, and the last fight let us face. The internationale unites the human race. So raise the rally, and the last fight let us face. The internationale unites the human race. Let me tell a story, for I really can't ignore the happenings in Leicestershire in 1984. 2,500 walked across that picket line, but a tiny band of miners would not go into the mine. They were called the Dirty 30, so they wore that name with pride. Was the only striking miners, they stood against the tide. And if you call them heroes, they would surely disagree. But the dirty 30 and the kin are all heroes, Sam me. The railway men at Colville, well, they backed the miners too. And when a coal train came along, they would not let it through. And the women, they were mighty, maybe mightier than the men. They suffered so much hardship, but they'd do it all again. They were called the Dirty 30, so they wore that name with pride. As the only striking miners, they stood against the tide. And if you call them heroes, they would surely disagree. But the Dirty 30 and the kin are